Jean-Luc Picard never forgot Kirk's advice from Star Trek Generations. When Star Trek Generations premiered in 1994, it marked a monumental crossover between two eras of the franchise. Captain James T. Kirk, the daring swashbuckler of the original series, and Captain Jean-Luc Picard, the thoughtful and diplomatic leader of the next generation. While much of the movie is remembered for Kirk's heroic final stand, it also gifted Picard with a piece of wisdom that would echo throughout the rest of his Starfleet career and into his later years. Kirk's advice, delivered in a rare moment of reflection, became a philosophical anchor for Picard, shaping not only his command, but his personal journey in ways that extended far beyond that single film. Kirk's words of wisdom. The most poignant exchange between the two captains in Generations comes not during a battle or a tense negotiation, but in a quiet moment. Kirk, who had spent much of his career pushing boundaries, confesses to Picard that one of his greatest regrets was not realizing how important the simple moments were until they had already passed. He urges Picard not to let command or duty blind him to the life he could have outside the captain's chair. In Kirk's eyes, adventure was not only about saving the galaxy, but also about appreciating the fleeting, human connections along the way. Kirk's message was simple yet profound. Life is more than the missions you take, the orders you give, or the titles you hold. It is about living fully, embracing joy, and making room for experiences that remind you what you're fighting for. Picard's dilemma in Generations. When Kirk delivers this advice, Picard is at one of the lowest points in his life. His brother and nephew have just died in a fire, leaving him shaken and feeling the weight of his legacy. The normally composed captain is rattled by questions of family, mortality, and what he will leave behind once his Starfleet career ends. Unlike Kirk, Picard had chosen duty over family long ago, committing himself fully to Starfleet. Kirk's words hit Picard at exactly the right time. He needed to hear that a life well lived wasn't defined solely by duty. Kirk's willingness to reflect on his own regrets opened a door for Picard to see his own path differently. It wasn't advice about tactics or command. It was advice about living. That distinction is why the words stayed with Picard long after the Nexus, long after Kirk's sacrifice, and long after Generations ended. Echoes in the Next Generation films. After Generations, Picard's choices began to subtly reflect Kirk's advice. In First Contact, for example, Picard's obsession with revenge against the Borg nearly consumes him, but it is his ability to connect with Lily Sloan on a personal level that ultimately pulls him back. He learns that survival and victory mean little if you forget what you're protecting, the lives and dignity of others. That lesson feels like a continuation of Kirk's words. Don't get lost in the fight and forget the life within it. In Insurrection, Picard is faced with the temptation of staying on Baku, where time seems to stop. Although he chooses duty, the film highlights how deeply he is tempted by the idea of simple joys, of slowing down, of embracing a life outside Starfleet's constant demands. It's the most direct echo of Kirk's "don't waste the moment's" philosophy, and it shows that Picard, even in middle age, was still struggling with how to balance duty and life. The legacy of Kirk's advice in Picard. Decades later, Star Trek. Picard revealed just how deeply Kirk's words had embedded themselves into Jean-Luc's worldview. The retired admiral is no longer defined solely by Starfleet. Instead, he seeks meaning in the connections he builds with Raffi, Seven, Rios, and eventually with a son he never thought he'd have. In his twilight years, Picard's journey is not about saving the galaxy again and again, but about discovering what it means to live fully outside the captain's chair. The Picard of the 25th century is still the same man who took his duty seriously, but he is also someone who finally allowed himself to experience vulnerability, love, and family. It's hard not to see the thread connecting this evolution back to Kirk's words in Generations. Kirk's warning that it is all too easy to let life slip away while chasing titles and duty became the quiet lesson Picard carried into his retirement. Two captains, one philosophy. In many ways, Kirk and Picard were opposites. Kirk was the bold risk-taker who relied on instinct, while Picard was the measured strategist who valued diplomacy. Yet, when their paths crossed, they shared a universal truth about leadership. A captain's life is not only about the ship, but also about the person who commands it. Kirk had to learn that lesson the hard way. Picard had the benefit of hearing it before it was too late. That's why Kirk's advice in Generations resonates so strongly within the Star Trek universe. It wasn't just a passing line. It was the symbolic passing of the torch, a reminder that even legends must pause to reflect on the meaning of their choices. Conclusion. The weight of simple moments. For Jean-Luc Picard, the greatest gift James T. Kirk left behind wasn't his sacrifice in the Nexus, but his wisdom. Generations of fans saw Kirk as the fearless adventurer, but in that final crossover, he became something more, a mentor who reminded another captain to live. Picard never forgot that lesson. It shaped his decisions, tempered his regrets, and ultimately allowed him to find peace in the kind of life Kirk only realized he wanted when it was too late. In the end, Kirk's final advice proved timeless. The measure of a life isn't written in medals or victories, but in the moments we choose not to let slip away. And for Picard, that wisdom became the guiding star of his later years, an inheritance from one captain to another, ensuring that the torch of humanity was passed along with the torch of